As you know, one of the most misinterpreted characters to ever walk the planet Earth, was a man many called Jesus. Who is called by Christians Jesus Christ Liesus Christos, and called by the Jews Yeshua HaMashiach, and called by the Mohammedans Isa al-Masih. The one thing they all agree on is that he was or will be the Messiah, and each group wants this Messiah to be theirs. They shape his life and his character around their beliefs. And their holy books, the Old Testament, the New Testament, and the Quran. What they don't do is enough thorough research. If they did, they would find out that there was more than one man named Jesus in the New Testament of the Bible, and all of the concepts of Jesus came from the ancient Egyptians. If these preachers, or imams etc., did their research, they would find out that 1. The Jesus of the Mohammedans was just one of many. 2. The Jesus that the Jews are looking for has not come yet. 3. That Jesus of the Christians of 2,000 years ago was different from the Jesus that the Jews are looking for and the Jesus that the Muslims write about in their book, the Quran. 4. And not to mention Paul, the self-appointed disciple of Jesus, created his own Jesus, and this is the one that many people today are following. However, they have no idea that the Christians' Jesus story came out of the ancient Egyptian deity Horus. And most of today's beliefs or religions came out of the Egyptians, which originated from the ancient Sumerians, who received their doctrine from the Anunnaki. So all the different religions that exist today all came from ancient doctrines, written in cuneiform, which you can find, called the Enuma Elish, the Gilgamesh epics, the Atrahasis, etc. Most Christian denominations and other religions that believe in Jesus of 2,000 years ago do not know the time of Jesus' birth. Millions of preachers, priests, and imams, etc. teach and assume that he was born on the day called Christmas, which is on December 25th. It was a Scythian monk, Dionysius Exignon, who on December 25, 530 AD, made this date up from the Babylonian ruler Nimrod's, son of Semiramis and Cush, birthday. While Bible scholars admit that it was nowhere near this date that Jesus was born, and they suppose that it must have been at the beginning of the year 1 AD, not realizing it was 7 AD. Millions disagree on the method of his birth. Few know who he was. Much of the Christian doctrine pre-existed before Christianity, and was called Egyptian mythology. In fact, all of the Egyptian deities were real people, so it was not mythology. I have to ask you to bear in mind that the facts, like other foundations, have been buried out of sight for thousands of years in a hieroglyphical language that was never really read by Greeks or Romans. Don't accept the Rosetta Stone story. If Christians were able to read their Bible in its entirety in the language that they claim it was revealed in, without poor translations, and if the Mohammedans were able to read their Quran in its entirety and in the language they claim it was revealed in, the Quraysh dialect without poor translations, both would find that the entire story of Jesus the son of Mary is there, but they don't have an original Quran, not even a copy of it. According to the Jews, the existence of Jesus is found in the Talmud, as Yehoshua Ben Pandera. One account affirms that, according to a genuine Jewish tradition, that man was a disciple of Yehoshua ben Parachiah. It also says, he was born in the 4th year of the reign of the Jewish king Alexander Jannaeus, regardless of the assertions of his followers that he was born in the reign of Herod. That would be more than a century earlier than the date of birth assigned to the Jesus of the Gospels. Yehoshua, son of Parachiah, the teacher of Ben Pandera, was a president of the Sanhedrin, which is an assembly of 71 ordained Hebraic scholars which functions both as a supreme court and legislature. He was one of those who in the line of descent received and transmitted the oral law, as it was said, directly from Sinai. According to the Babylonian Mishnah 6.4, under the Sabbath, this Yehoshua was stoned to death as a wizard, in the city of Lud, or Lydda, as the Passover. The Babylonian Gemara says that there exists a tradition that on the rest day before the Sabbath was when a crucifixion would occur. The Passover is a festival done in gratitude of being protected by the Elohim when they passed over Mizraim, Egypt, killing the firstborn of every animal and person of the Egyptians because the Israelites were in bondage to the Egyptians, and the Yahuwah of the Elohim commanded the Pharaoh to let them go. When the Pharaoh refused, 10 plagues were sent on them. Finally, after the plague of death, the 10th plague, the Pharaoh let the Israelites free, which is known as their exodus out of Egypt, Exodus 12:11. The Passover is a permanent reminder of the Elohim's deliverance of the Israelites' 430-year bondage. Yehoshua was known as the son of Pandera, or Ben Pandera, who is said to be his father by some and his mother to others. He is also called the son of Shtada, who is sometimes referred to as his father or mother. Others claim it is the name for one parent being the father. Yet, still others claim it to be Shtada, meaning she who went astray, as being his mother and Pandera his father. They claim his mother was Miriam, the hairdresser, and she had been false to her husband, making Shtada a title rather than her actual name. Remember, these are not real stories, these are stories that came out of the Talmud and the Mishnah. The Mishnah is an Aramaic Hebrew word also spelled Mishnah, which is the foundation and the principal part of the whole Talmud. It is the representation of the oral or traditional law called halakot. The term Mishnah is derived from the Aramaic, Hebrew, verb shana, meaning to repeat, under the influence of the Aramaic word Tana. However, it received the meaning of to learn and was applied specifically to studying the oral law. Essentially a matter of memorizing and recapitulation. This book was accepted by the Jews everywhere and was recognized as their authentic code of law. It is said that the Mishnah is a collection of teachings passed on by word of mouth from teacher to pupil, a collection of oral laws made by Rabbi Judah, the patriarch. Rabbinical Jews believe that the oral law was delivered to Moses son of Amram and Jochebed at Mount Sinai along with the same authority and degree of importance. Within the pages of the Mishnah, its origin and development are explained as follows. The Mishnah's own accounts of the origin and history of the oral law is given in Tractate of both too. At the same time that the written law was given from Sinai, the oral law, too, was delivered to Moses, and handed down, orally, in turn to the leaders of successive generations, to Joshua, to the elders, Joshua 24:32, to the prophets, to the men of the great synagogue, the body of teachers who administered and taught the law after the time of Ezra, to Simeon the Just, 280 or 200 BC, one of the remnant of the great synagogue, to Antigonus Soka, then in turn, to the 5 pairs of leaders, Hosea ben Joezer and Hosea ben Yohanan, 614 BC, Joshua ben Perahiah and Nittai the Arbalite, Judah ben Tobai and Simeon ben Shemaiah and Abtalion, and Hillel and Shammai. Thus, the chain tradition was brought to the threshold of the Christian era. These two parts are so disposed throughout the whole Talmud that the Mishnah serves first as a kind of test of the law, and is followed by the Gemara as an analysis of its various opinions leading to definite decisions. Gemara, an Aramaic Hebrew word meaning completion or tradition, is a word applied to the Talmud as a whole. For nearly 500 years after the Babylonian Talmud was completed, the study of literature was greatly hampered, partly due to public calamities and partly owing to dissension among the scholars, but in the 11th century others wrote further additions to the Talmud. The Mishnah's purpose is to cherish and develop the law. Jewish tradition states that after Moses received the law at Mount Sinai, it was handed down orally to leaders of the following generations. The Gemara, meaning completion, in Aramaic, Hebrew, is the comments and discussions within the Talmud in relation to the text of the Mishnah. It is the comprehensive commentary on the Mishnah and forms the second largest portion of the Talmud. Basically, it is an explanation of the term or subject matter of the Mishnah. The body of the Talmud is divided into 6 order or books called Seders, comprising of 63 treatise or parts, or 525 chapters. The blasphemous writings of the Jews about Jesus are referring to Yehoshua ben Pandera, and not to the Jesus of the Gospels. It is Ben Pandera they are talking about when they say they have another and a truer account of the birth and life of, the wonder-working, and death of Yehoshua, or Jesus. The only Jesus known to the Jews was Yehoshua ben Pandera, who had learnt the arts of magic in Egypt, and who was put to death by stoning and crucifixion by them for being a sorcerer. As you can see, they adopted this Jesus, who is mentioned in Acts 13:6, as Simeon Jesus, and brought him into their scripture, with a new name. Again, this proves that the Jews have no real knowledge on who Jesus is, or where he came from. Acts 13:6, Barnabas, Simeon, Manaen, Herod, Tetrarch, and Saul went all the way to the island of Paphos, where they met a certain learnt man named son of Jesus of the tribe of Judah, who claimed to be a newsbearer. The Talmud gets its name from the word lamud, meaning taught, the teaching. It means the book which contains the teaching. This teaching is called the Talmud. That is, the doctrinal book which alone fully expounds and explains all the knowledge and teachings of the Jewish people. The language of the Talmud was pure Hebrew and very similar to Aramaic. It is considered to be the fundamental code of the civil and canonical law of rabbinical Judaism. As to the origin of the Talmud, the rabbis regard Moses as its first author. Rabbinical Jews place great importance on the Talmud. They often place it above the Torah. Therefore, the modern Jew is the product of the Talmud, which is nothing but a collection of arguments and discussions used in the Palestinian academies of the Pharisees. It supposedly embodies the rules, precepts, and interpretation of the laws contained in the Torah, by which the Jewish people profess to be guided. There exists 2 types of Talmud: the Palestinian Talmud, Talmud Yerushalmi, which originated in 250 AD, and the Babylonian Talmud, Talmud Bavli, which was developed in the school of Sura in Babylonia, and was completed in 550 AD. Both the Babylonian and Palestinian Talmuds consist of the Mishnah and Gemara. The Talmud is nothing but the Jews' attempt of destroying the original manuscripts that Moses received, with a book full of lies handed down from generation to generation. He propagates Christianity and practices his perverted version of the religion of Abraham, which he calls Judaism. He doesn't follow the Torah. He has written his own book, the Talmud, which he calls the written law. These are man-made laws that were not even written down until 500 years later. 1512 and 1473 BCE, over 1,500 years had passed before the writing of the Talmud. Which is enough time for the evil one to try to change historical facts. The Talmud are tales that were made up from the Pharisees. The word Pharisees in Ashuric Syriac, Arabic, is al-Pharisee and came from the root farasa, meaning to regard searchingly, scrutinize. In Aramaic, Hebrew, word is parushim or paru, meaning separated or separatists, and the Greek word is pharisaios, also meaning separatist, were an offshoot group from the 70 elders who waited at the base of Mount Sinai while Moses received the first 10 commandments, Exodus 24:9. Exodus 24:9, then Moses went up, and Aaron's generous eldest son Nadab by Elisheba, and Abihu Aaron's son by Elisheba, and 70 of the Zakane elders of Israel. These elders supposedly received a more profound revelation which was not written down at the time, thus, it became known as the oral law, which they called Torah Shabil Peh, and eventually took precedence over the written law, which they called Torah Skepiktav. From this they compiled a set of hadith, tales, which they referred to as laws, calling it the Talmud and the Mishnah. A group of lay priests or scribes interpreted the law and became the greatest authorities. For instance, the Torah said Moses spoke to the burning bush, Exodus 3:2, they added that Yahuwah was in the fire, making the fire good. Therefore, you can sacrifice by consuming the fire. They claim that the reason why Moses remained so long on the mountain was because God was giving him the oral law. God could have given him the written law in one day. They also believe that the law which was given to Moses is not as great as the oral law. Now let's stop here. If the God in Exodus 24:12 was on top of the mountain giving Moses the written law, then who, may I ask, was giving the 70 elders the oral law? And how and when did the oral law become greater than the written law? Obviously the Torah was altered by these Pharisees to suit themselves. The point is, that these Pharisees altered words and changed meanings of the Torah the same way Paul, the 13th self-appointed apostle, changed the doctrine of Jesus in order to create a new religion, called Christianity. Paul himself admits that without the story of Jesus' so-called crucifixion and resurrection there would be no faith, 2 Corinthians 15:12-14. For all those who have all their faith in these words of Paul, read in 1 Corinthians 15:9 what he says about himself. 1 Corinthians 15:9, for I am the least of the apostles, that am not meet to be called an apostle, because I persecuted the church of God. During the time of Jesus, the Pharisees was the most powerful religious group amongst the common people and his most powerful opponent. They spent most of their time philosophizing concerning the laws of Moses, professing to be learnt men. The Pharisees and Jesus conflicted over the issues of dietary observances. Refer to Matthew 9:11, 9:14, Mark 2:18, Luke 5:33, ritual cleanliness, Mark 7:2-5, Luke 11:37-39, John 9:16, keeping the Sabbath, Matthew 12:2, Mark 2:24, 3:2-4, Luke 6:2, 6:7, 14:3, and almsgiving, Matthew 15:5-6, 22:17-21, Luke 11:40-42. The Pharisees hated Jesus and rejected the idea that he was a Messiah, because they saw him as a threat to all they had built up, John 7:43, 12:19, 11:47-48, 12:42. At the time of Yeshua's coming, the Pharisees were the leading authority of all Judea. Not only did they govern religious matters, but they were the decision makers on civil matters as well. If they were to allow Yeshua to grow in popularity, they knew they would see the people turn aside the commandments of men, which is the basis of their doctrine, for the scriptures, Matthew 15:3-6, 9, 16:12, Mark 7:7-8. Yeshua did not hesitate to tell them what he thought of their hypocrisy and snobbish attitudes, calling them the vilest of names, Matthew 3:7, 15:7-8, 23:2-5, 23:23. Some of them were Romans and others were Israelites who worked for the Romans. Some notable Pharisees were Nicodemus, John 3:1, 750, 1939, and Joseph of Arimathea, Matthew 27:57, Mark 15:43, Luke 23:50, John 19:38, and the 13th self-appointed apostle Paul was also a Pharisee just like his father. It was the Pharisees who arranged the plot to kill Yeshua of 2,000 years ago, John 11:47-48. At the final destruction of the temple in 70 AD, the Pharisees emerged as the absolute leading authority, forcing the disappearance of their opposing party, the Sadducees, altogether. Many Judahites were already living in Babylonia, having been exiled previously. In Babylonia, the Pharisees found it easy to make up and enforce all their unethical codes and morals because the Babylonian society was already depraved, with its idol worship and sexual perversions to name a few. The Pharisee doctrine, known as the Talmud, shaped the tenets of life and thought of the so-called Jew. In Babylon, their laws flourished and 1,000 new laws were formulated, bringing about the Babylonian Talmud. The Babylonian Talmud was called a monument of human folly. Not only this, but worse, the Bible you read today is from the ancient Babylonian manuscript, which was undoubtedly misconstrued by the Pharisees. The Pharisees were influenced by the practices of the wicked Babylonians whose rule they found themselves under. In Babylon, sexual perversion had become a way of life. Yet, when the Judahites were put out of Babylon, because they were rising too much in strength and power, they were not able to openly continue these practices because other societies did not allow such perversions. But these perversions remained in the Talmud. Not even your average Jebusite knows of the indecencies that are allowed in the Talmud. The Pharisees have the right to kill anyone as long as it is done indirectly, as in the manner of Yeshua was to be killed on the cross at the hand of the Romans. The priests were permitted to marry a girl child under 3 years and a day and have sex with her with the explanation that a little girl under 3 years and a day would regain her virginity as she cried tears of purification. Intercourse with a small boy is also considered permissible. The penalty for adultery does not include sex with a minor, the wife of a minor, or the wife of a heathen. Rape in a perverted manner is outside the jurisdiction of the law and was therefore not punishable. Today, these immoral practices of the Talmud are openly abandoned. Living in Christians' lands, Jews cannot totally practice the requirements of the Talmud because such perverse actions are not allowed in most societies. Most Jews are ignorant of such Talmudic practices. Refer to the book of Revelation chapter 13 verses 1 to 18. Jerusalem had become a very violent place and it was difficult to live under Judaism, so the scribes priest, called Sadducees, made the laws more livable. In the year 70 AD, Jerusalem was destroyed and all the Sadducees were destroyed also. It was then that the Pharisees reinstituted the laws of Judaism, which is totally different from the laws of old Judaism. The Pharisees and Sadducees are two of the three Hebraic parties in Palestine. During the 2nd and 1st centuries BCE, the Sadducees and Pharisees were at constant battle with each other because the Sadducees did not allow interpretations or traditions of the law beyond the Torah, while the Pharisees went outside of the Torah all the way up to the book of Ezra. So both the Pharisees and Sadducees modified and altered the laws. However, the Sadducees only modified inside the Torah. Most of the rabbinical laws as it exists today originated with the Pharisees. It was these same Pharisees that were responsible for the supposed death of Jesus the Messiah. He came unto his own, and his own received him not. John 1:11. The authorities of the Jews did not accept Jesus because he constantly exposed their hypocrisy. Matthew 15:7-9. They rejected him because they feared that the people would accept him and they in turn would lose the power and position that they loved so much. Jesus said this to the Pharisees in John 8:44, "Ye are of your father the devil and an adulterous generation," in Matthew 12:39. As mentioned previously, the Jews know of a man named Yeshua Ben Pandera, who is Simon Bar Jesus of Acts 13:6, the son of Jesus, but there were two other men with the same name or title existing in that time of Jesus of 2,000 years ago simultaneously. One could be found in Acts 13:6, referred to as Simon Bar Jesus, which would translate from Jesus's language, which is Aramaic, Hebrew, as Simon the son of Jesus. Simon Bar Jesus is the Bar Jesus of Acts 13:6. He's mentioned twice in the Bible. Once under the name Simon Acts 8:9, and once under the name Bar Jesus Acts 13:6. He is also called a Judahite and a prophet, though it is mentioned that he was a false prophet. Then he was called a magician, a magi, etc. So his tribe and its nobility was tied in, and by calling him a sorcerer, they gave him power. They're giving him mainly three attributes of his father. He was a prophet, from the line of prophets. He was from the tribe of Judah. And he had magical powers, but he was declared a false prophet. It didn't mean anything. Just like there are sects of people who listen to the Sunni Muslims who are saying, "I'm a false prophet because I don't listen to them." If they go and become a prominent figure in this country, and their doctrine spread, then me and Dr. Rashad Khalifa, and the Honorable Elijah Muhammad, and the rest of us would have been false prophets. When they went to Mecca, and sat around in their little circles, on Hajj, with the pale man, they said Imam Isa is a false prophet. Elijah Muhammad is a false prophet, Imam Isa is a sorcerer, etc., etc., etc. Some Sudanese might say, well, he's of the Mahdi family, and they'll say, so what, he's of the tribe of the Mahdi, he's still a false prophet, and he's still a sorcerer. That's the same thing that happened to Simon Bar Jesus, who was of the tribe of Judah, a sorcerer, and a false prophet. However, that is one particular sect circle, or in other words that's their opinion. What's happening is that you're reading a book written by the Greeks to support Paul's Jesus. Paul's Jesus is the son of Jesus, Simon Bar Jesus. Bar Jesus of Acts 13:6, is the son of Jesus and Mary of Magdalene. Yeshua and Mary of Magdalene were both a part of a separate mystic order. Yeshua was an Essene, who belonged to the ancient mystic order of Melchizedek, and he also had association with the Knights Templars, who held a great secret of his life, and Mary Magdalene belonged to the temple of Isis. Yeshua became fond of Mary Magdalene, they married in Cana and had a child, whom they named Simon Bar Jesus.